We like to think of human history as a straight, ascending line. We started with sharpened sticks, moved to bronze, then iron, and eventually the silicon chip. It's a clean, logical, and comfortable story. But what if that story is missing its most important chapters? What if the timeline we've been taught is actually full of holes? When you look at ancient Egypt, you're told you're looking at the pinnacle of the Bronze Age. But if you look closer, under the sand, deep in the bedrock, or inside the very blocks of the Great Pyramid, you start to find things that simply shouldn't be there. We're not talking about gold jewelry or beautiful art. We're talking about industrial-grade engineering. Granite sliced with the precision of a laser. 100-ton boxes finished to a flatness within a few microns. That's less than the width of a human hair. And drill holes in some of the hardest stone on Earth that suggest a speed and power we only achieved in the modern era. The problem isn't just that these things are impressive. The problem is that they are mathematically impossible for the tools of the time. According to the history books, these people only had copper saws, stone hammers, and sand. But try cutting solid rose granite with a piece of copper and see how far you get. Hint, you won't even leave a scratch. Today, we're stepping away from the myths and the mummies to look at the technological ghost. Physical evidence of a precursor civilization that mastered the material world long before the first pharaoh even took the throne. These are 9 pre-Egyptian technologies that should not exist. And once you see them, you can never look at a pyramid the same way again. In 1936, during an excavation at the edge of the Saqqara Plateau, a British archaeologist named Walter Emery stumbled upon something that would challenge our entire understanding of ancient history. He was clearing out the tomb of a high-ranking official named Prince Sabu, dating back to the First Dynasty, roughly 5,000 years ago. Among the usual funeral offerings, Emery found a shattered object made of a dark, fragile stone called schist. When he painstakingly pieced it back together, the result wasn't a vase or a plate. It was a 3-lobed circular disc with a central hub, looking disturbingly like a modern boat propeller or a centrifugal pump. Now take a second to look at this shape. It is incredibly sophisticated. It features 3 thin, curved lobes that fold inward toward a central cylinder. The geometry is so complex that even today, with our 3D printers and CNC machines, carving this out of a single block of stone would be a nightmare. But here's the kicker. Schist is a metamorphic rock that is notoriously difficult to work with. It's composed of layers that flake and chip easily. To carve these paper-thin aerodynamic curves into such a brittle material without breaking it requires a level of mastery over stone that we simply don't attribute to the First Dynasty. The official explanation for mainstream Egyptology is that it's a ritual vase or perhaps an ornamental lampstand. But let's be honest, does that look like a vase to you? If you put liquid in it, it would spill out of the sides. If you put a candle on it, why create such a complex, balanced geometry? When engineers look at the Sabu Disk, they don't see a decorative plate, they see fluid dynamics. In recent years, researchers have created 3D printed replicas of this disk and put them to the test. When you spin this shape in water, it creates a powerful centrifugal vortex. It functions almost exactly like a modern impeller, a part used in pumps to move liquid or air. It is perfectly balanced, designed for high-speed rotation. But here is the massive contradiction that keeps historians awake at night. The wheel wasn't supposed to have been introduced to Egypt for another 1,000 years after Prince Sabu died. And yet, here we have a highly advanced, balanced, aerodynamic wheel found in one of the oldest tombs in Saqqara. If this was part of a machine, where is the rest of it? Or, perhaps more intriguingly, is the Sabu Disk a stone copy of something much older? Imagine a primitive person finding a metal propeller from a high-tech craft. They wouldn't know how to make the metal, but they might try to replicate that sacred shape in the only material they knew, stone. Whether it's a relic of a lost machine or a tribute to a forgotten science, the Sabu Disk remains a smoking gun of a technology that, by all accounts, should not exist. If you ever find yourself in London, at the University College, there is a small, unassuming artifact tucked away in the Petrie Museum that might be the most important piece of evidence ever recovered from Egypt. It isn't made of gold. It isn't covered in royal hieroglyphs. It is simply a small, tapered cylinder of pink rose granite, barely a few inches long. It is known to history as Granite Core Number 7. It was discovered in Giza by Sir William Flinders Petrie, the man often called the father of modern archaeology. Now, Petrie wasn't a dreamer or a conspiracy theorist. He was a man of cold, hard measurements. He was the first person to truly survey the pyramids with mathematical precision. And when he picked up this specific core, he realized he was holding a physical impossibility. You see, a core is the waste product of a tube drill. When you drill into stone with a hollow pipe, the centerpiece stays inside. That's the core. But when Petrie examined Core 7 under a magnifying glass, he found something that defied the laws of primitive tools. There was a continuous, uniform spiral groove etched into the granite, running from the top of the core all the way to the bottom. It looked exactly like the threads on a modern screw. Now, why does a spiral groove matter so much? Because in engineering, the distance between those grooves tells us the feed rate of the drill. Petrie took his micrometers and measured the distance. He found that the drill was sinking into solid rose granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, at a rate of 1/10 of an inch for every single revolution of the drill. Let that sink in for a moment. To put that in perspective, if you take a modern, high-speed steel drill today and try to penetrate granite, you wouldn't get anywhere near that depth per turn. Petrie himself, who was a very conservative scientist, calculated that to achieve this kind of bite into the rock, the drill would need to have at least 2 tons of pressure pushing it down, combined with a rotational speed that we usually only see in heavy industrial machinery. The official story tells us that the pyramid builders used copper tubes and loose sand as an abrasive. But there's a massive technical problem with that theory. Abrasive sand creates random, messy scratches. It wears the stone down slowly. It cannot, by the laws of physics, create a single, deep, continuous spiral thread that cuts through both the soft quartz and the much harder feldspar crystals in the granite with equal ease. To do that, you need a fixed-point cutting tool, something like a diamond or a jewel-tipped bit that is significantly harder than the granite itself. But the Egyptians didn't have diamonds in their toolkits. They didn't even have hardened steel. So how did they do it? When you look at Core 7, you aren't looking at the work of a man with a copper pipe and some wet sand. You're looking at the fingerprint of a high-speed precision power tool. You're looking at a technology that could penetrate granite as if it were soft wood. Core 7 is the smoking gun of a machine age that, according to our history books, didn't exist for another 4,000 years. It is a silent witness to a level of engineering that we are only just beginning to understand. Now, we need to go underground. About 30 feet beneath the sands of Saqqara, there is a labyrinth of tunnels carved directly into the limestone bedrock. This is the Serapeum. And inside these dark, narrow corridors lie 24 massive granite boxes that defy every rule of ancient construction. Each of these boxes, and their lids, is carved from a single block of solid Aswan granite. They weigh between 70 and 100 tons each. To give you an idea of that scale, that's equivalent to about 50 modern SUVs stacked on top of each other. But the weight isn't even the most shocking part. The real mystery is the precision. In the 1990s, master craftsman and engineer Christopher Dunn entered these tunnels with industrial-grade measuring tools, the kind used in aerospace manufacturing. He placed a precision machinist's square against the interior surfaces of the boxes. What he found was staggering. The surfaces were perfectly flat to within a few 10,000ths of an inch. That's a level of flatness we usually only see on modern granite surface plates used in high-end laboratories. The corners were even more impossible. They were perfectly 90 degrees, not just close, but mathematically exact. To achieve this in solid granite, you can't just rub it with sand and water. You need high-speed machining. You need tools that can maintain a perfect axis while cutting through one of the hardest materials on our planet. Then, there's the logistics nightmare. The tunnels of the Serapeum are barely wider than the boxes themselves. There's no room for hundreds of slaves to stand on either side and pull ropes. There's no room for massive wooden rollers. How did a primitive culture move 100-ton objects into a cramped underground tunnel and then place them into recessed chambers with such surgical precision? And here's the detail that mainstream history often ignores. There is no soot on the ceilings. In a dark, oxygen-deprived tunnel, you would need thousands of torches to see what you were doing. Torches leave carbon deposits. But the ceilings of the Serapeum are clean. This suggests they weren't using fire for light. They were using something else. Mainstream Egyptology tells us these were coffins for sacred apis bulls. But when they were first opened, they were empty. No mummies, no bones, just air. Why spend decades of labor and utilize industrial-level technology to create perfectly sealed, vacuum-tight granite boxes for nothing? The Serapeum isn't a cemetery. It's an abandoned power plant or a high-tech storage facility. It is a place where stone was treated like plastic, and where the laws of physics as we know them seem to have been bypassed by a technology we are still trying to rediscover. Once you see this next detail, you will never be able to unsee it. If you walk around the base of the Pyramid of Menkor in Giza, or look closely at the granite casing stones of the Great Pyramid, you'll notice something incredibly strange. On the faces of these multi-ton blocks, there are small, protruding nubs or knobs left on the surface. They look like little handles or bumps that weren't sanded down. At first glance, you might think they were just unfinished work, but as you dig deeper, the mystery takes a global turn. These exact same knobs, with the same shape, size, and placement, appear on megalithic walls 7,000 miles away in Peru, at the massive fortress of Sacsayhuaman and the Sun Temple of Ollantaytambo. You find them in Turkey, in Greece, and even on Easter Island. Why would builders on different continents, separated by thousands of years and vast oceans, leave the same peculiar marks on their stones? Mainstream archaeologists suggest these knobs were used as lifting points, places to attach ropes or levers to move the stones. But that theory falls apart when you look at the physics. Some of these knobs are at the very bottom of the stones. Others are so small and fragile that if you tried to lift a 20-ton granite block with them, they would snap off instantly. So, if they weren't for lifting, what were they? Engineers and alternative researchers have a much more radical theory: the softening of stone. When you look at these knobs, they don't look like they were carved out of the rock. They look like they were squeezed out, as if the stone was temporarily in a plastic or clay-like state. Imagine a giant machine pressing against a block of granite that has been softened by heat, vibration, or a chemical catalyst. The knob is the residue, the part where the material was forced out of a mold or a pressure point. Think about the implications. If the ancient builders had the technology to soften granite, one of the hardest stones on the planet, it would explain everything. It would explain how they achieved such perfect laser-thin joins. It would explain how they carved those complex 90-degree interior corners we saw in the Serapeum. These knobs are like the trademark of a specific type of high-tech construction. They are the leftovers of a process we don't yet understand. It's as if a single architectural ghost traveled the world, teaching a very specific method of advanced masonry that used stone not as a brittle solid, but as a moldable material. Are we looking at the remnants of a global technology that existed long before the dawn of our recorded history? The knobs are a silent yes. They are the physical evidence that someone, somewhere, knew a secret about matter that we have completely forgotten. In 1858, an archaeologist named Auguste Mariette found a limestone tablet buried in the sand near the Temple of Isis, right next to the Great Pyramid. This artifact is known as the inventory stela. On the surface, it looks like a simple list of statues and repairs made by the pharaoh Khufu, the man we are told built the Great Pyramid. But when scholars translated the text, they found something that threatened to burn every history book in the world. According to the Stela, Khufu didn't build the Great Pyramid or the Sphinx. It claims that when Khufu arrived at Giza, the Sphinx was already ancient, and its tail and head were being swallowed by the sand. The text literally says, "He found the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, beside the house of the Sphinx." Do you see the problem? If Khufu was the builder of the pyramid, how could he find a temple beside it that was already standing? And why would he be restoring the Sphinx if his own son, Khafre, was supposedly the one who built it years later? For decades, mainstream Egyptologists have dismissed the inventory stela as a forgery or a pious fiction created by later priests to give their temple more prestige. They say the style of the writing is too modern for Khufu's time. But while the historians were arguing about the text, the geologists were looking at the rocks. In the 1990s, Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, conducted a detailed study of the Sphinx enclosure. He pointed out something undeniable. The Sphinx and the walls surrounding it are covered in deep, vertical fissures. In geology, this specific type of erosion is caused by one thing only: heavy, prolonged, torrential rainfall. Here's the bombshell. Egypt has been a bone-dry desert for at least 5,000 years. The last time there was enough rain in Giza to cause that kind of erosion was at the end of the last ice age, somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000 years ago. This means the Sphinx wasn't built by a Bronze Age pharaoh. It was carved by a civilization that existed when the Sahara was a lush green jungle. The inventory stela isn't a fake. It's a testimony. It's a record from a pharaoh who was trying to preserve a legacy that was already thousands of years old when he found it. If the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, then the technological ghost we've been looking for isn't just a theory. It's a historical fact that has been staring us in the face for millennia. We've been attributing the greatest wonders of the world to the people who inherited them, rather than the people who actually built them. To understand the true scale of the mystery, we have to travel south to the granite quarries of Aswan. There, lying half-finished in the bedrock, is a giant that never stood up. It's called the unfinished obelisk. If it had been completed, it would have been the largest single piece of stone ever handled by human hands, standing 137 feet tall and weighing a staggering 1,200 tons. To put that in perspective, 1,200 tons is the weight of about 3 Boeing 747s. Mainstream history tells us this massive monument was being carved out for Queen Hatshepsut using nothing but dolerite pounders. Dolerite is a stone slightly harder than granite. The theory is that hundreds of workers stood in narrow trenches, day after day, smashing these stone balls against the granite to wear it away. But when you actually stand in the trench next to the obelisk, that theory starts to crumble. Look at the walls of the trench. They aren't covered in the jagged, uneven marks of a hammer or a chisel. Instead, they are covered in long, smooth, repetitive scoops. It looks exactly like someone took a giant ice cream scooper and carved through the solid granite as if it were soft butter. There is a rhythm to these marks. They are uniform, wide, and they transition from the vertical walls to the horizontal floor in a continuous curve. If you were using a stone ball to pound the rock, you would get a crushed, dusty surface. You would not get these clean, flowing troughs. And then there's the human problem. The trench is incredibly narrow, barely 2 feet wide. If you had hundreds of workers in there, they wouldn't even have enough room to swing their arms to generate the force needed to break granite. The heat in Aswan can reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The dust would be suffocating. It is a logistical and biological impossibility. So, what are we actually looking at? Engineers who visit the site often point to a different possibility: thermal or ultrasonic machining. The scoop marks look like the result of a tool that could either vibrate at a high frequency or generate intense heat to soften or vaporize the rock in a specific path. It looks like a machine was moved across the surface, excavating the granite in precise passes. The obelisk was abandoned because a massive crack developed in the stone. But the mystery isn't why they stopped, it's how they started. If we can't explain how they made the trench, how could we possibly explain how they intended to lift a 1,200-ton monolith out of a hole and transport it hundreds of miles down the Nile? The unfinished obelisk isn't just a failed project. It's a crime scene of an ancient, high-energy technology that we are still unable to replicate today. Deep within the Temple of Seti-Phans at Abydos, one of the most sacred sites in ancient Egypt, there is a lintel stone that has sparked more debate than perhaps any other carving in history. High up on a ceiling beam, there is a set of hieroglyphs that, to any modern eye, look disturbingly familiar. There is an image that looks exactly like a modern attack helicopter, complete with a rotor blade and a tail fin. Next to it, an icon that resembles a heavy tank or an armored vehicle, and just below, a shape that looks like a sleek, supersonic jet or a specialized glider. When photos of these carvings first hit the internet in the 1990s, they went viral instantly. People claimed this was definitive proof that the ancient Egyptians had contact with high-tech flying machines, or perhaps even time travelers. But if you ask a mainstream Egyptologist, they will tell you there's a perfectly logical, albeit complex, explanation. It's called a palimpsest. In ancient Egypt, it was common for a pharaoh to appropriate the monuments of his predecessors. This specific lintel was originally carved during the reign of Seti I. After he died, his son, Ramesses II, decided to replace his father's name with his own. The royal scribes filled in the old carvings with plaster and carved the new titles on top. Over thousands of years, the plaster crumbled away, leaving a bizarre overlap of two different sets of hieroglyphs. According to the official diagrams, the helicopter is actually the result of a Who Subdues the Nine Bows title, overlapping with a Who Protects Egypt title. On paper, the math seems to work. The shapes do align. Case closed, right? Well, not quite. Even if we accept the palimpsest theory, we are still left with a staggering statistical impossibility. Out of the millions of hieroglyphs carved across Egypt, why did this one specific overlap, in this one specific temple, create three distinct, modern military vehicles? If you overlap two random sentences in English, you usually get a messy, illegible scribble. You don't get a perfect silhouette of a Boeing 747. And then there's the Saqqara bird, a small wooden object found in a tomb in 1898 that looks like a high-performance glider. When engineers tested the Saqqara bird's proportions in wind tunnels, they found it was aerodynamically sound. So we have to ask a deeper question. Is it possible that the scribes at Abydos didn't just make a mistake? Could they have been visually influenced by a subconscious memory of machines that once filled the skies? Were they trying to encode a lost history into the very names of their kings? Whether it's a freak coincidence of overlapping stone or a hidden message from the past, the Abydos helicopter remains a haunting reminder. Sometimes the errors of history are more revealing than the facts themselves. Right next to the eastern face of the Great Pyramid of Giza lies a massive dark floor made of black basalt. Most tourists walk right over it without a second thought. But for an engineer, this pavement is a gold mine of forbidden technology. Basalt is one of the hardest stones available. On the Mohs scale, it's significantly tougher than the limestone used for the pyramid's core. To cut it, you need immense force. And when you look closely at the edges of these blocks, you don't see the irregular marks of a hand chisel. You see something far more industrial. On several blocks, there are clear, curved striations, deep parallel grooves that could only be made by one thing, a massive circular saw. Now look at the radius of these curves. By calculating the arc of the saw marks, engineers have estimated that the blade used to cut these stones was at least 6 to 10 feet in diameter. Imagine a circular saw the height of a basketball hoop, spinning at high speed, slicing through volcanic rock as if it were plywood. But the mystery goes even deeper. As the saw cut through the rock, it left step marks where the blade was stopped and then restarted. These marks show that the blade was moving through the stone at an incredibly high feed rate, meaning it wasn't just grinding away slowly over months. It was biting deep into the basalt with every rotation. To power a blade that large, through stone that hard, You need more than just manpower. You need a massive amount of torque and a stable energy source. You need an engine. Sir William Flinders Petrie, whom we mentioned earlier, noticed these marks back in the 1880s. He was so shocked by them that he wrote in his journals that the pyramid builders must have had tools that we are only just beginning to reinvent. He even suggested they used diamond-tipped saws, because nothing else could leave such clean, sharp cuts in basalt. But according to our history books, the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty didn't have hardened steel to make a blade that large, let alone diamonds to tip it with. They were supposed to be using copper, which is a soft metal. Trying to cut basalt with a copper saw is like trying to cut a steak with a wet noodle. It's physically impossible. These saw marks are the fingerprints of a high-tech construction site. They tell us that 4,500 years ago, the Giza plateau wasn't just a place of prayer and tombs. It was an industrial zone, filled with the scream of high-speed blades and the hum of machines that, by all rights, should not have existed for another 4 millennia. For our final mystery, we aren't looking at 1,000-ton blocks, but at something you could hold in your hand. Beneath the step pyramid of Djoser, archaeologists discovered something breathtaking. Over 40,000 stone vessels, many of them dating back to the pre-dynastic era, long before the pyramids were even built. But these aren't your typical clay pots. They are made from some of the hardest materials on Earth: diorite, schist, and translucent quartz. When you examine these vases, the level of precision is honestly terrifying. Some have necks so long and narrow that a human finger can't even fit inside, yet the interior is perfectly hollowed out. Even the shoulders of the vase are paper-thin and uniform in thickness all the way around. If you were carving this by hand with a chisel, it would be impossible. The moment you hit the interior wall, the vibration would shatter the brittle stone. Modern engineers have placed these vases on high-precision lathes and found that they are perfectly balanced. The symmetry is so exact that it suggests they were turned on a machine. Not a foot-powered pottery wheel, but a high-speed, fixed-axis lathe. Look at this specific vase, made of diorite. Diorite is so hard that modern granite cutters use diamond tools to shape it. Yet the ancient makers managed to leave a surface finish as smooth as glass. Even more baffling, some of these vases feature undercutting, where the inside is wider than the opening at the top. To achieve this, you need a tool that can expand once it's inside the neck, or a flexible cutting head that maintains constant pressure while spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute. This is CNC-level precision, thousands of years before the invention of the steam engine. Why would a primitive society invest so much energy into making thousands of perfect stone jars? They didn't even have iron tools, yet they were mass-producing precision-engineered containers that we struggle to replicate today. These vases are the ultimate proof that the technological ghost wasn't just about big buildings. They were masters of the small scale too. They possessed a deep, fundamental understanding of material science and rotational mechanics. When you hold one of these vases, you aren't just holding a vessel. You are holding a piece of hardware from a forgotten industrial age, a silent witness to a time when humans or someone else mastered the very atoms of the earth. 9 technologies, 9 signatures of a world that shouldn't exist. From the high-speed drills of Giza to the precision vases of Saqqara, the evidence is carved in stone. Literally. We can no longer look at these artifacts and say they were made by chance or primitive persistence. The math doesn't allow it. The physics doesn't support it. We are looking at the remnants of a high-tech civilization that was wiped from the map, leaving only their most indestructible monuments behind. This is the takeaway. History is not a straight line. It is a cycle of rising and falling. And if we want to understand our future, we must first be brave enough to admit that we don't fully understand our past. These stones aren't just ruins. They are a challenge. A challenge to keep looking, keep questioning, and never assume the story is finished. Because the most incredible discovery might still be waiting under the sand.